Yesterday, on the 8th of February 2023, the new version of Bing was introduced by Satya Nadella and others to demonstrate what this new search engine is going to do. So I'm going to talk about that, but let me put that in a greater context. So what I'm going to talk about generally is that I'm going to first give a bit of impression on what the search market itself looks like today, who's doing the indexing and so on. And then I'm going to talk about Bing versus Google searches as we see it now. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Bing demo itself. And if you have seen it in that, Satya Nadella talks about how a particular farmer who's doing some chats in Hindi was actually able to access government information without going through the standard procedure, namely trying to do all of those things one at a time, downloading the PDF file and so on, all of them being done seamlessly on the web itself. So I'm not going to talk about that particular one. I'm going to talk more about the other example they illustrated, namely 5-day trip of Mexico City. So let me start with the market shares of the searches themselves as of 2023. Right now, Google has over 91% of the market share. So all the searches that we do these days, over 90% of them comes from Google. And if we look at all the other things, they are complete minnows. So Bing has 3.09%, Yahoo has 2.87%, and so on and so forth. So essentially, it's a market for Google. And therefore, Google takes it very, very seriously because that's where their bread and butter revenue comes from, advertising in that space. And that explains why Bing wants a share of that pie. Now, what about this space over the past decade or so? If we look at, say, 2008, 2009, Google's market share was still over 90%, and it is still that way today, which is something extraordinary that this age a tech company is able to dominate a market so completely like that. And obviously Google wants to continue with that. And this did not happen just by accident and Google all of a sudden woke up with all this thing. They have followed a very, very specific strategy which led them to that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. So how do we actually measure these things, how the market is evolving over time? So there's a common belief that the web is growing and growing and growing. It's not quite true. And this picture gives us an idea of what's going on. So the first date here is 2018, 5 years ago. And at that time, Google was crawling or indexing about 50 billion pages. What about today, 5 years later? It's still indexing about 50 billion pages. The thing to notice here is that red line was pretty steady, went up from 50 to 60, and then it kind of went back down, and then it's kind of crawling up. Nevertheless, the very, very clear trend on that is that the indexing market, as Google was crawling it, was relatively stable, and now it is a lot more variable. Does that mean that the market itself has become variable? Not quite. It's the frequency with which Google actually is doing the indexing today is much more frequent. It used to be a lot slower. Now it's a lot faster. So for example, if I put up a page, how long does it take for it to get indexed in Google? It varies, obviously. Some of the ones that Google crawls frequently comes within a day, or sometimes within a few hours, or even within a few minutes. More common ones, so if I am a nobody, when I put something up, it takes about 48 hours for Google to have it indexed in their crawl search space, so that 48 hours later, if I search that, it will show up. It could take up to 2 weeks. So that is what has happened in that crawl space that we are talking about. Now, what does Google actually do when it actually looks at a web page? Does it immediately index everything? No. It indexes about 10% of what it looks at. Why? Number one, there's a lot of duplicates out there. It does not want to include the duplicates. It does not want to also have an older version of the same page which is out there, but it's no longer relevant, and therefore it picks up the more recent version. And this is an important point which we'll come back to in 1 second. So let me switch gear and talk about some specific searches, what Google does. So obviously, for me, I do a search of myself. Sounds very narcissistic, but let's go past that. So here is what Google does. It gives me in various categories, and you see a total number. It took about 54.54 seconds to find 76,000 odd results. Now, if you actually go through all these things, you will not find 76,000. It's much smaller. But what it does, it immediately captures all the headline bits of those 76,000 pages, which actually has my name on it or something close to it in it. Now, the important thing to keep in mind that it does not actually include all the things that has an exact match. It also includes a lot of approximate matches, which means that it uses a heuristic method in order to get things that are close to it that I might get in my search, which may have misspelled my name, for example, whereas other search engines don't necessarily do that. So here is what I do is do exactly the same thing and search in Bing. That's Microsoft search engine. So the first thing that appears there, if you look at it, it says I'm already dead. Of course, this is not me. If you look at the name carefully, you will see it's Tapan, the first name, and Sinha is the last name. So this gentleman was a very formidable movie director. He made movies in Bengali and some in Hindi. However, he is also dead, not me. So what Bing picks up a close match, but not necessarily an exact match. Whereas if you go back to what I was saying about Google searches, it does the exact match first. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. When people are searching, if they know what they're searching, then Google gives you a much better, more accurate result. And that's one reason why we see Google dominates the market over any of these other search engines. So one of the things that I was watching on the Bing's presentation yesterday was it said Bing does this, that, and the other, and one of its example was to ask Bing about make a planned for me for a 5-day vacation in Mexico City. And then it goes on to say, okay, so what is the nightlife like? And in the nightlife part of the presentation, it gives a list of places that you might want to go to. Okay, so here's the list. I have highlighted number 3 in that list. So remember, this is without any other information. Bing receives this and it spits this out. The place is called El Almacen. And if you go back to the Bing's presentation at 29 minutes and 30 seconds, this thing appears. And this is what Bing says about El Almacen. It says, it's a rustic and charming bar. It serves boutique beer, serves mezcal, serves tacos. And then it says the bar has no ratings, no reviews, but it does have a Facebook. So immediately you think, why does the search of a search engine, the 5 things it mentions that you should go for nightlife is one of those things that has no ratings, no reviews. Keep in mind, these are no rating, no reviews by Bing. If you do the searches on Google, it's a completely different matter. And Mexico City is one place I know a little about. I lived there for over 2 decades. So let me tell you what Google says on that. So I do the same search on Google, and this is what it shows up right on the first page. So what I have done is made a little circle and an arrow to point out what it highlights. It highlights that it is an LGBT classic Zona Rosa bar. And in the other column that you see there, it specifically says it's a gay bar. And it is. It actually has a back room. If you don't know what back room is, then check out, search Google and find out what a back room in a gay bar is. So, is this Bing new and improved? Looking at it now, with the presentation that they have done, I am very skeptical. It lags Google by a mile. And what it seems to have done is put in a slightly different interface rather than one search box. Now you have 4 different things you can click on and you do the search. So the important thing here is to see how Google, with its new interface, the Google Bard, is it going to do any better? That is what we would like to see.